Now, we want to start to think about as we start to build web applications, and especially as our web applications start to get a little bit more sophisticated, is to think about the design of how we're building our web pages, and how we're building our web applications. And in particular, anytime we find ourselves copying a lot of the same information from one place to another, that's probably not the best design. And you should start to think about how might you design this a little bit better. It's not great design, one, just because there's some redundancy that probably doesn't need to be there, but also because it makes the page a little bit more difficult to change, and add a little more difficult to update. If I instead want to change both of these headings to be red instead of blue, then all of a sudden, I need to change my code in two places. I need to change the style attribute on this first heading up here. And I also need to change the style attribute on the second heading down there. What I'd like to do is to somehow just be able to write the style code once, and then have it apply to both of these headings. And in fact, there is a way to do that. What we can do is instead of doing what we might call inline styling, where we take the CSS code and place it directly as an attribute of an HTML element, we can move our style code to an entirely different part of the web page. Recall again that at the top of our HTML page, we have this head section that just includes information that's useful to know about the web page, but isn't actually part of the body of the web page, the content that the user sees. This head section is a great place where we can begin to put some style information about how we would like for this web page to be styled. So what I can do here is instead of putting these style attributes inside inline with these HTML elements, I can inside of the head section of my web page add a style element, where in between the opening style tag and the closing style tag, I can add any of the style information that I want. And here's the way that syntax is going to look. I first need to specify what types of elements am I going to style. And in this case, I want to style all of the H1s. So I can just say H1. And then all of the style code is going to go inside of a pair of curly braces, where I can say I would like the color to be blue, and I would like the text align property to be centered. So now, here's what I've done. I've taken the CSS code that used to be down here inside the body of the page actually as an attribute of these H1 elements. And I've moved the style-related code to a different part of my page altogether. Now, the style information is inside the header of my page, inside of the style element, where I've said for every H1 element, here's how you should style it. The styling is in between the opening and curly closing braces here. And I've said that every H1 should have a color of blue. And every H1 should have a text align property of center. And that is then going to apply to all of the H1 elements that my web page happens to find inside the body of my web page. So there's a couple of advantages here. Advantage number one is what we talked about a moment ago. I don't need to duplicate the same code in both of these H1 elements. I can write it once and say, apply this styling to all of the H1s that show up in the page. And advantage number two is we've been able to factor out the style code to somewhere else, just to make it a little bit cleaner. So that instead of having a really long line, you might imagine, if we had not just 2, but maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different CSS properties, that would have taken up a lot of space on one line. I can instead in a more readable, more organized way, move that style-related code to the style element at the beginning of the page just to make it easier to read, easier to visually understand. And just to clean up the body of the web page as well. And that's going to be another of the key themes that's going to come up again and again in this class. This idea of separating things out so that every piece can sort of be independent of one another. Our structure of the web page inside the body is separate from the style. And we'll see the same sort of idea appear again and again, as we begin to try to design web applications well. So now if I take this exact same page, and go ahead and refresh style.html, we'll see that we see the exact same thing. Both of the headings still show up as centered. Both of them still show up as blue. But now we have the advantage of having only written the style code once instead of needing to write the exact same style code multiple times in the same way. But it turns out that we can even do a little bit better than this, because one thing you might imagine is that if I have a web application or a website that has multiple different web pages, it's probably going to be likely that each of those web pages might need to be styled in similar ways. If I have a big banner at the top of one web page, then in other pages related to that page, I might want the same banner, styled in the same way, using similar style information. So, in the next video we will look at how might we go about doing that. Thank you.